Thank you. Hello, everybody. We'd like to get started with our third speaker, please. So let's can get settled in, and I forgot the. All right. So our next speaker is Uli Lorimer, who's going to talk about the Northeast Native Seed Network. And Uli is the Director of Horticulture for the Native Plant Trust. He oversees the facilities and operations at Garden in the Woods and at Nasami Farm. Uli brings 20 years of experience working with native plants in public gardens, with previous positions at right here at Brooklyn Botanic Garden, working with Daryl Morrison, one of my favorites, Wave Hill Garden, and the U.S. National Arboretum. He is a tireless advocate for the use of native plants in design spaces, and through his public speaking, writing, lectures, and media appearances. Yet Uli feels most grounded with his hands in the soil.
Thank you, thank you. I just want to start by saying how lovely it is to be back here in Brooklyn and to see so many familiar, smiling faces. I was saying earlier that my friend cup is overflowing at the moment, so it feels good to be back. So I'm here to talk a little bit about a relatively recent effort, and I wanted to pick up on a couple comments that Jessica mentioned that I think are really very poignant, is that in order to really tackle the scale of the challenges that lay ahead, it has to be a collaborative effort. There is no single entity that can do all of this themselves, and I think that this, sort of nascent network that we're putting together is an example of the kinds of collaborations that have the potential to grow and really help put a dent in some of these serious challenges that we're seeing. So I want to start with I poke fun a little bit at this because my coworker says that this is his daily affirmation. He wakes up every morning and he recites this little saying to himself. But I do think it gets really to the point that plants are vital to our success and to our future, and that seeds are the genesis of it all. And I've long had a real reverence for seeds, and growing plants from seeds and collecting seeds for me is this circular activity that feels very fulfilling, and nurturing something and seeing its potential and watching it grow, and then completing that by collecting the seed again and so forth. So, but anyway, so it's sort of in short, this is what I want to talk about why we're doing this. So give you some contextual information about why this effort's happening now, what exactly are we doing, and the work that still needs to be done, because there still is quite a lot that needs to happen. So Native Plant Trust has had sort of a long involvement with seed banking for quite some time. We started our rare plant seed bank back in 1991, along with the formation of the New England Plant Conservation Program, which was one of the first of its region, of its kind in the country, actually, to recognize that plant conservation does not exist within state boundaries, and it exists within a much larger region. And I think one of the big successes of this program has been the ability to get all of the right people in the room at the same time. And so these are federal entities, state entities, local botanists, conservationists, to, on a yearly basis, discuss plant conservation priorities and target monitoring, data collection, and seed collection for the rarest of the rare in New England. And so this seed banking has been going on for, like I said, for over 30 years now, and we've got a big database of information about these things that we're beginning to sort of tease apart for trends, and a lot of this sort of conceptual framework is being used in other parts of the country to launch similar collaborative plant conservation based efforts. Bureau of Land Management in 2001 launched the Seeds of Success program, which is a program that is mostly self-serving for the Bureau of Land Management, And so I think of it as like a closed loop. But what is successful in this is that they have created some really wonderful protocols that many of us that are involved in seed banking and seed collecting have adapted and used. In 2008, there was, as you can read here, a memorandum of understanding that was signed for what the BLM designated as the SOS East region, which comprised 35 states. And so I'll show you in a minute here that it doesn't stand to reason. There's not a whole lot of federal land here in the Northeast, and this is one of the things that makes this kind of an effort a challenge. But you can see there was quite a lot of entities that were involved in the original MOU. And then one of the first big projects to come out of this was post Hurricane Sandy, where collections were made, by these different organizations all up and down the East Coast, primarily targeting coastal communities. And this was entirely a reactive effort. Hurricane came through, destroyed so many coastal communities, and then there was this recognition or like, well, there's not anywhere close to enough seed to put this stuff back. So they needed some efforts to do that. And so that effort, 3-year effort, comprised over 2,000 collections, and our team at Native Plant Trust made about 865 collections of over 350 different taxa, and I'm happy to say that about 75% of those actually went directly back out to funded programs and projects. So this is why SOS is entirely mostly a West Coast or Western activity. These are all the BLM lands, Forest Service lands, and so while this program has been in place for over 2 decades, the majority of the funding has all flowed to the West because, we read about major wildfires and other disasters, and they have literally millions of acres, hundreds of millions of acres to manage. And here in the Northeast, there's very little in the way of federal land, and so, and then of course they, like I said before, they have designated the entire East Coast as one whole region, as opposed to these other sort of different regions out west. Now, so that's a challenge from the federal standpoint. These are collection locations for the Seeds of Success program. Again, you can see very heavily skewed towards a lot of those areas in the west, and then certainly a whole lot around in our region here that were the result of that effort in 2015 and 2017. So the next piece of why we're getting to do this was a really wonderful paper that was published by Ed Toth and Sarah Tangren in 2018. Ed is the former director of Greenbelt Native Plant Center over here in Staten Island. And it was basically a survey of restoration practitioners and their uses and their preferences and commercial availability on the East Coast. And the things that were like big eye openers for me, that 75% of people want local ecotypes, and that the overwhelming majority of them have to source farther than their concept of what is local would support. All right, and so their most popular seed vendor was on average 363 miles away from their project. Second most popular vendor was over 800 miles away from their project. And so we all have concerns about bringing in ecotypes and things from other parts of the region. There just was no local source, and this is just broadly on the East Coast here. The other big thing that was a big takeaway was that the procurement time in the process is not anywhere near long enough, and this problem still exists today. And that projects come up, they get species lists and specifications are there, and then you expect to go out to as if you were shopping at a box store, and these things are on a shelf waiting to be picked up. So it's really hard to produce ecotypic material and genetic plant material with short lead times, and that inconsistency of the market is the reason why not more people are getting involved in it. Because it's like, if there's not another Hurricane Sandy, there's no desire for these things, and so nobody's asking for it, so why would you grow it? So the respondents that we said here are, you know, across a lot of different states here. Some of the states with you know, more populous than others, this is just a little bit to show about the kinds of the reasons why people were involved in looking for this kind of material. So, and I think it's important here because it also includes horticulture and landscape. And one of the big efforts of this seed network is not just to serve the restoration community, but also to feed into the horticultural industry, because there has been an absolute explosion in the demand for native plant materials in our region more recently. There's also a lack of technical support, and so a lot of these are things that I think, again, coming out of this report are things that people want and need in order to be more successful in their projects. So not only sort of tailored species lists, but you know, planting protocols, propagation protocols, fact sheets, transfer guidelines, you know, all these design templates. I mean, these are all things that I think as a burgeoning and growing seed network, if we want to offer a robust suite of resources to people, then these are the kind of things that people need and people want. So this was, again, you know, very well supported. The next sort of, you know, big paper that came out is as you can see, this assessment of native seed needs. This was just published this year, and it was the result of a couple of years, probably an extra year because of COVID, a committee commissioned by the National Academies of Sciences. Basically, the bottom line is here that restoration is entirely impaired by the supply of native plants that are available. In other words, we cannot do it if we don't have the materials that we need to use. This report is out there. I would recommend everybody take a look at it. It is a 200-page report. And so if you have time, or if you have trouble sleeping, pick it up and read it. Essentially, I'll try to summarize some of these things here. So, you know, the demand has certainly increased over time, but our current supplies are falling way short. You have a relatively small segment of seed suppliers that are actually specializing in native seed. There's plenty of seed growers that will give you forage crops, agricultural seed, but very few, or relatively small, are interested in growing plants to produce seed. And the reasons are that you have to have specific expertise, sometimes specialized equipment, longer lead times to produce things. You know, just hearing from Ian about species that are double dormant, you know, and how are you going to produce a quantity of that beautiful nodding onion seed if you need 3 or more years to produce seed from it. There's also, I think, a mismatch in that we have the expectation that native plant seeds should meet the same sorts of like quality and germination standards that our agricultural standards do, and that's not the case. You know, you can buy a bag of corn seed and expect close to 100% germination because it's been very much bred to do that. But, you know, some of our wetland species, for example, if you get 25% germination, that's great. And so you have to also adjust your standards in that sense as well. I said before that the market is volatile, it's inconsistent, and that's also borne out by this report here, and that we need more locally adapted seed and greater diversity of that seed species, and the idea of seed transfer zones, which at this point is really more conceptual, and I'm not sure entirely how it will be enforced. But, Western United States has 615 million acres of managed lands, publicly managed lands. We, over on the other hand here, have a patchwork of state, local government, land trusts, private landowners, and it really, again, brings into emphasis the need for coordination and a coordinated effort to do this. So SOS is the sort of gold standard and established model for the protocols of like how do you collect seed ethically with genetic diversity in mind. And again, I just wanted to pick up again on what Jessica mentioned about being proactive rather than reactive. And I feel like we're still always behind the 8 ball and trying to catch up to these problems, and we know they're coming. And I think it's time for us to be more prepared for these things so that we have them on hand so that when the next challenge comes, we are ready for it. The idea of public-private partnerships, I think, are also really important in this context because of the reality in the Northeast there being so many private and smaller ownerships, but state governments and the federal government certainly have a role and an interest to play in this and being able to leverage some of their finances. I think a particularly successful example of this is Iowa Tallgrass Prairie Center and Iowa DOT. And they have, for I think over a decade now, collaborated on collecting seed from remnant prairie strips along highway medians and other places, putting those seeds into seed increase plots, and then being able to take those seeds and put them back out so that they're not mowing prairie strips and highway medians, and instead trying to restore some of that diversity and pollinator and insect support. And it's a really wonderful partnership of a nonprofit organization and a government entity working in tandem towards the goal of saving biodiversity. There's clearly a lot of research and technical development that's needed, and we also really need to begin to embrace and fold in traditional ecological knowledge as well. So these are all things that are all called for in this assessment. They have a number of bulleted points and then sub-bullets underneath of this. Again, I don't need to read all of this sort of stuff here, but federal agencies are being asked to actively participate in the building of regional networks. And so the way this looks for us currently, Native Plant Trust has a 5-year agreement with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that is funding collection teams, it's funding equipment, it's funding workshops and symposia, all because they're interested in supporting the formation of a regional seed network. And that's a really important aspect because we can't do it ourselves. You know, I don't have $500,000 laying around to do this, but they do. And given the size of the Inflation Reduction Act and other larger pieces of legislation, $500,000 to us is like pennies when you're talking about millions and millions of dollars. So, and they have a mandate to continue to do the outreach and the training. Furthermore, this recommendations calls for the agencies to work with private partners to expand seed storage and seed cleaning infrastructure. So this is something that's also sorely lacking in our region right now. In the West, where its ambient humidity is 5%, you can have a giant warehouse full of seed and not have to worry about it rotting. But imagine if you tried to build a non-climate controlled facility here. It'd be sort of a disaster. So currently the only sort of seed storage and seed cleaning piece of infrastructure rests at Greenbelt Native Plant Center. And it has been used when Mid-Atlantic Regional Seed Bank was active, and it's used by Parks Department now. I know that the folks at Hilltop Hanover are also beginning to amass equipment and storage and so forth, and we at Native Plant Trust in our nursery in Western Massachusetts are currently building, we've built a separate dedicated building for bulk seed cleaning. So this will house equipment that will help us transition from like hand cleaning to more scaled up cleaning of larger quantities of seed. We're not quite ready to scale up to tractor mounted harvest equipment and that kind of stuff, but that is the goal down the line. And then we're also building a sort of tripling the size of our seed storage, and that construction is currently underway at the moment. And so we're trying to act on some of these assessments here. So internally, we've long had conversations within Native Plant Trust about our own seed needs, and that our rare plant seed bank is full at the moment, and we need to expand that. So we need more room, more chest freezers to continue to do this good work. Our own nursery operation operates by wild collecting almost all of the plant material that we sell, and growing plugs and so forth, and we just can't meet the demand by wild collecting it. We also get all sorts of requests from state DOTs that are interested in the same kind of thing that is happening in Iowa. Solar farms is another effort right now. Arnold Arboretum recently installed a solar array at the Arboretum, and it's completely underplanted with ecotypic native plants that we grew and supplied for them, and it looks fantastic, and it's alive with insects, and they don't have to mow it or do anything. And so it's an example of what could be a good partnership with green energy infrastructure that is expanding. Massachusetts also has lots of great tax deferred incentives for solar and all sorts of things that they're really trying to incentivize the use of this shift away from fossil fuels. And of course, we get lots of requests from the restoration and the horticultural communities as well. So a couple of years ago, we started these conversations with folks at Eco59 in Connecticut, NOFA, who had started a small seed business called Eco59, and then we're able, as I said, to secure some private funding for infrastructure, for some research, and with this Fish and Wildlife Agreement. And it became apparent to us as we were beginning to fold more and more people into the conversation that there was a separate conversation happening that was led by a really wonderful woman named Eve Allen, who works for the Ecological Health Network. And she had been doing her master's thesis on building a supply chain network for native plant materials, but coming at it from the perspective of sort of social networks and network analysis. And we really decided that what we needed to do was to join both these efforts instead of both of us kind of working in parallel. So, as I said before, our challenges are that our stakeholders are many and diverse. We've got over 500 land trusts in New England alone. On top of that, all of the state and municipal forests, state and town, some of the national forests that are here. So coordination is really key, and making sure that the communication flows between everybody. The infrastructure piece is something that we're trying to address that doesn't exist currently. Building out the partnerships, and then building out a seed increase program. And so this is taking wild collected seed and putting it into a seed increase plot to bulk it while maintaining as much genetic diversity as possible. We've worked on target species lists. These are this ends up actually being a little list of some of our working groups right now, as we have quite a bit to target here. So we also want to make sure that there's some agreed upon standards and definitions of like what is an ecotype, what is an ecoregion, what does genetically diverse source identified seed even mean, what are some of the protocols to ethically and morally collect wild seed with genetic diversity in mind, and trying to establish those so that all of the people that we partner with have an understanding of basic standards and protocols of how to go about this. Seed labeling is another one that we've talked quite a bit about. In other words, if you were to receive a package of seed from the network, what information would you want to know that's on there? You'd want to know what generation of harvest it is, where it came from. All these sorts of things are, trying to be as transparent as possible around provenance so that you can make the best decisions for your needs. Clearly, there's a whole data and documentation piece to all of this. So, not only tracking where wild collection location information is, but also tracking those seed lots as they work their way through the seed increase programs and go out to restoration programs or feed into commercial horticultural streams is really, really important. And then, my vision is to try to basically and I'm not coining this term now, but just throwing it out there, something like a seed academy, you know, a clearinghouse, a place that has resources, it has training, has protocols, you can schedule workshops so that anybody who wants to get involved in being a grower for us will have as much robust technical support as possible so that you can be successful. So we've taken all of this together and we sort of formally launched it at the National Native Seed Conference down in Virginia this past March, and it was really wonderful to also hear about how other seed networks were constructed, because there are existing ones that are already, you know, decades old in the western portions of the country, the Great Basin, in Utah, Nevada, Arizona. All these people have it. I was really interested in seeing how these different networks were funded, because in the end it is all about money in a certain way. And so it was a really great conference for that reason. So we put together a bunch of different talks here. As you can see, Sarah presented about her surveys. Emily and Lindsay from Hilltop Hanover had a really wonderful presentation. We talked about farmer engagement with SEFRA, who has done this eco-region effort, and I'm particularly excited about the idea of more partnerships with the organic farming community and this effort, because it's a win-win for everybody. It's an opportunity to hopefully create a sustainable market for young farmers to get involved in, to produce this seed. It'll give them a diversified revenue stream. It will also give them the benefits of growing wildflowers in their gardens, which brings pollinators and beneficial insects, and just has, and for me, I feel like the overlap of wanting to support locally and shop locally when it comes to food makes so much more sense, and overlaps with wanting to support local insects and knowing where your plants come from. So that's sort of the connection that we're looking to make. Currently, our network leadership is sort of split between these two, although we sort of see ourselves as host partners, in other words, because we're leveraging a little more of our resources. But in truth, it is quite a large group of folks here, and this number is only growing as this effort keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Our network mission, as is stated here, is to increase the accessibility of genetically diverse source-identified wild seeds in the ecoregions. So ecoregions look like this, a little bit more adapted from the regular EPA maps, and it is quite a large area to cover. In reality, there's going to be hot spots of activity that we're going to be trying to bring together and unite over time, and really hopefully cover all of these regions. We've had a lot of conversations with folks in Vermont and New Hampshire and Maine. Rhode Island is doing some stuff right now. We've talked to folks in Mount Cuba, down in Virginia. So, you know, I feel really encouraged by the amount of good work that's going on in other parts of our sort of greater Northeast region. Our structure here, again, is going to include a lot of different people from all different parts of the supply chain. So, you know, we need the expertise of botanists to make sure that we know what we're collecting is what we want to be collecting. We need, you know, farmers to be able to turn those wild seeds into pounds and pounds and pounds of more ecologically valuable foods. And then we need the engagement of youth, researchers, citizen scientists, to figure out how best to use that plant material, whether grown into plant material or seed itself, out on the landscape. Our steering committee here, again, has folks that bring different bits of expertise from all of these stages here. You know, we have representatives from the horticultural community, from the nursery community. We have folks that are, you know, John Campanelli, for example, is doing his PhD work on like state DOT and sort of municipal level applications of native plant materials, and just really wonderful folks. So in the end, we really want to try to build a replicable model that others can follow. because we think this is important to be able to eventually establish more regional networks that can connect with each other on a national scale. The Southeast needs a seed network just as much as the Mid-Atlantic needs it. Even the Midwest, I had some really encouraging conversations with folks in Ohio right now. There is nothing like it there. There's also nothing like it in Wyoming and places that are huge outside of the sort of closed loop of the federal programs. There's really not much out there. Building the market is not an easy task, but it's one that we're really committed to doing. And we obviously want to contribute to the overall knowledge of what's happening. Communication, coordination, best standards and practices, and making sure that we continue to sort of position our efforts within national and international efforts are all really important. So we had, just as an example of what we have completed so far, based on this National Academy of Science recommendation, we had a number of different meetings in our species selection committee over a course of 8 months. We have a lot of wonderful folks here, some people in the room who contributed to this effort, and the result is well, I should say that first we filtered our list to start with everything that we thought was ecologically viable and recommended. We filtered out all of the rare and threatened taxa. We filtered out taxa that can't be stored using traditional methods. So if it's something that's recalcitrant or you need to store in liquid nitrogen, we're not going to bother with that right now. We filtered out things that are difficult to grow for now, and ones that may not have a potential market. For example, I love skunk cabbage, but nobody's like clamoring for skunk cabbage seed. So that's probably not one that we're going to be working on. But and so all of that sort of reviewed and standardized for nomenclature. And so we've come up with our first provisional list that has a total of 67 different taxa and 29 genera. And so this is and I should say this is not a one size fits all list. It is very much created more for the New England portion of the Northeast, but it's a place to start. And so these are ones that we have identified as having sort of the broadest utility in terms of use either from the home gardener all the way through to large-scale ecological restorations, covering a wide variety of habitat types. And the idea is that we have partners and folks that are out there collecting the seed right now, and that those wild collections are going to form essentially the basis, a seed bank of wild collections that we can feed into the seed increase program into the future. So here at Nasami Farm, there's our seed cleaning building. Here's our next steps for our walk-in cooler and freezer that's happening. We have our own little plots going as well. And we also have a lot of work to do. I should mention as well, just to give a plug out, if anybody's looking for seed right now, okay, Hilltop Hanover has seed. Eco 59 is a small seed business in Connecticut. They have seed that's available right now. Wild Seed Project in Maine has been doing this for a long time. They also have seed increase plots. They've got seed that's available. Pinelands Nursery in New Jersey also has lots of seed available now, and they're sitting on it, and they need to sell it, and they want it to get it out. So don't think you have to wait for some sort of official network release, because it's going to be a couple of years till we get all this stuff running. But our partners have their own operations, and part of the point of the network is also to lift up and promote the activities of all of our individual collaborators. And so seek those folks out, please, because they've got wonderful things, and they need a home. So looking forward, we have we need to figure out the finances of this, and this is not an easy chore. We have lots of people that have donated time and expertise to date, but the network will have real costs, which involve a network coordinator and other sorts of things, and so we need to come up with some joint fundraising and joint cost sharing measures. I think we need to figure out a strategic plan as another thing to set out reasonable goals for the network to achieve over the next 5 years. Eve Allen is going to be spearheading a sort of end user market analysis, so we can have a better sense of what the demand is on the end user side and how that informs the species selection and what things go into the seed increase programs. In other words, if we understand the market, we can then calibrate the supply to meet what the market wants. And so really trying to look at this whole thing holistically. There's the Seed Academy idea, as I said before, and certainly working on standards and definitions around seed collecting, handling, storage, labeling are all sort of really important next steps. We need to expand, of course, because right now we've only kind of scratched the surface of the stakeholders that could be involved in this. Data and documentation, certainly. Next year, we're going to be hiring a seed collection coordinator and a number of part-time seasonal seed collectors. So this is through the Fish and Wildlife Service. So if you know anybody who wants to spend a summer collecting seed in New England and driving around and going to amazing wild places, please get in touch with me. We're also going to be hiring a seed technician that's funded through this Fish and Wildlife Agreement. That's going to be responsible for operating the cleaning equipment and doing the data entry and some of the seed increase plots care out at Nasami. There are the inklings of another publication in the works right now, which I think is something that's really needed, that we're sort of provisionally calling Seeds of the Northeast. And that's going to cover in great detail maybe 500 or so species of plants around how to collect, what to look for when, how to store, how to clean, how to grow and propagate, and trying to put all that stuff into a singular resource because it's sorely needed. And then there's another growing effort here to try to bring together more regional consortiums of seed banks and botanic gardens and see how we can all support each other, again, nestling all these efforts within national and international efforts. So with that, I will say thank you and happy to take questions. I was going to say, I totally understand if everybody wants to go home.
I have one with, obviously you're working with some more restoration nurseries, etc., and as part of the team. In your kind of engagement piece, I didn't see general nurseries. Where do you see, is there a place that they fit into the picture?
What do you mean by general nurseries? Like local home garden centers, or
sure, or nurseries that are in the region that are not focused solely on natives, that also carry natives, that do a lot of production, and that a lot of people who don't know perhaps about restoration,
right,
or aren't doing quote unquote restoration are buying from, and so do they fit in?
I mean, I think they should fit in down the line. What I think we're going to be bumping up against is that there are a number of very large nurseries that produce a lot of plant material that gets filtered in through to not just the big box stores, but also the smaller garden centers, and it's all the same usual approach. And this is actually a really great question, because I think one of the things that was really clear from Ian's talk is how little that information is out there. That if you want to know about, how is this plant propagated? Does it come from seed? Where was it collected from? None of that stuff is there, and unless we can continue to advocate for why source-identified seed-grown plants are important, you're going to continue to buy what they give you, which is they want you to be uninformed so that you continue to get what's out there. Now, I'm also very pragmatic, and I understand that that's what's out there now, and so I don't think it's wrong to necessarily use the material, but you don't have another choice. So the nursery industry, I think, is also very reactive to consumer demand and to consumer trends. And native plants are hot right now. They've been hot for a couple of years, and that is projected to continue. And so they're aware of that, and whether they decide I'm going to get more cultivars of this through my regular channels, or if enough people come to them and say, will you carry seed grown material or species material, because that's what I really want. So part of it is also has to be the consumer has to go and start asking questions and making demands. And so not only asking, can you tell me about where this plant's from, because this is important to me, but did you use any pesticides to grow this? Were there any neonics or anything like that used? And so the only way that the larger centers will eventually come around to this is by consumer demand. But also I think that as, I'm imagining this network really isn't going to be up and humming for another 5 years, maybe even longer than that. In which case we'll hopefully have the capacity to be able to say, okay, like we already have some interesting conversations. So one of our vendors for Native Plant Trust is a nursery called Van Berkom Nursery. It's in New Hampshire. And Van Berkom currently grows, I'd say, 75% traditional horticulture, non-native, perennial, ornamental cultivar stuff, and then the other 25% is natives. Just last year, they've launched their own New England eco-type line, so it's a line that is all seed-grown species, and they cannot grow enough of it. And I talked to the nursery owner, and he's like, if it was up to me, I would love to phase out like half of the other stuff that I'm growing and growing more of this, but what I really need is a consistent source of seed. And that's why we want to be one of your preferred partners in this network, so that we can buy seed from you and then turn that into our eco-type line and then sell it because they've got all the infrastructure to make this, to grow this stuff to retail size. They've got the shipping infrastructure and the trucks and all the things that we don't want to mess with. So that's the idea, is that you get these sorts of people in. Planter's Choice is another one that isn't necessarily just restoration. Pinelands has been doing more of the restoration stuff for some time, and they've got their own seed business and everything, so I don't see us supplying them as much as it's more of an information and knowledge exchange with Pinelands, and also being able to leverage our potential market on their behalf as a partner. So I think that there's sort of twofold. We actually also have to have a product to give to people, first and foremost. And then secondly, consumers have to keep banging the drum and saying, we want this, we want this, we don't want the old stuff anymore, and I want to be informed. I want to have a choice. And that's, I think, the best answer that I could give. So. Sure. Hilltop Hanover Farm. So Westchester County, they've got, you said 35 species in production right now. So they have seed that's available now. I'm assuming, Jessica, it's not all spoken for projects. Okay, yeah. So they're there, and then Eco 59, like I said, is a small sort of farmer collaborative seed company. They're basically looking at horticulturally popular species and trying to provide an ecotypic alternative to, like the butterfly milkweeds and the ironweeds and the Joe Pye weeds and the things that tend to be fairly popular horticulturally. Wild Seed Project has, I don't know how many species you guys are offering now. You've got quite a lot. 90, 80, something like that. So they've got great selection of stuff. So definitely check them out. And then, like I said, Pinelands has bulk quantities of things. They've got a good selection, more geared towards, Mid-Atlantic and New Jersey area.
So I don't know that you're going to have a definitive answer for this yet, but because you kind of brought up that you did this winnowing process of the different plants, what's the kind of internal feeling on kind of super reliable, ubiquitous natives that aren't actually native to the Northeast, like Penstemon digitalis and Rudbeckia hirta and things like that, that are like these bread and butter seeding plants, but like really are more Midwestern or Southeastern?
I mean, I think, I think down the line it'd be great to get involved in those. I don't think that's something that we're interested right now. I mean, one thing I didn't talk about are native annuals, which I think have great utility. And so, partridge pea, wild flax, I mean, there's a lot of things that should be more available, and current sources are all out in the Midwest. I think that, I keep trying to resist the urge to like really run with this. I think we need to be slow and steady and build it up. But I do think that down the line that should be something. The other thing I would say is that there's still a lot of interesting research that is coming out and that still needs to be done. And I'll give you one piece that came from our research botanist who did her doctoral dissertation at Chicago Botanic Garden looking at milkweed diversity. And so she sampled common milkweed across a broad geographic spectrum in the Midwest. She also sampled swamp milkweed, also along a broad swath, and found that there was very little genetic difference in the common milkweed. And it didn't matter if she was sourcing it from Illinois or West Virginia or somewhere else. And so that, to me, that says that where you source that particular plant might not be as important. But swamp milkweed had the other case where the genetic diversity was very much tied to each particular place, and it was distinct enough from one location to another where sourcing swamp milkweed is actually important. But I wonder about things like little blue stem or things that are really widely distributed, whether we're just dealing with a baseline of genetic diversity where it doesn't really matter, or if it actually does matter to be as local as possible. But without the research to support it, we fall back to the sort of more conservative approach and say that local is better, but it's not quite that simple. So, just to end on the words of your wonderful boss, Larry, it depends. So, anyway, thank you all for listening.
Just want to say thank you all for taking your time to come today. I definitely learned a lot. I hope that you did too, and have a wonderful weekend.